So first of all, I'm Annabelle from the Wix team, and welcome to our webinar. Just a couple of technicalities before we get started. First of all, if you have any questions during the webinar, you can go ahead and pop them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. But just make sure you don't add them to the chat box. The chat box is basically for us to talk any general comments during the webinar. And today we're going to be doing a Q&A about Studio workflow best practices. We're joined by our very own Anastasia. She's a technical designer from Wix Studio, and she'll be able to tell you a lot more about it than I can. So that's enough from me, and I'll turn you over to Anastasia to get started.
Anyway, hi everyone. It's really great to be here again. And I am Anastasia, a technical designer at Wix, and my day-to-day job is building marketing sites in Wix Studio. So I'll be happy to answer your questions on everything related to site building, layouting, effects, or interactions that you can create in Wix Studio. And before we are going to dive into answering your questions, I'll do a quick recap on what we have talked about in the past webinar. And meanwhile, you can add your questions to the Q&A box. So in the past webinar, we've talked about the importance of planning your site before you start building and what aspects to pay attention to. For example, duplicating of repeating elements once you've built them perfectly all over the breakpoints and not adjusting them one by one in all the breakpoints that you have in your site. And keeping the hierarchy of the elements across all the breakpoints. We also talked about the responsive behaviors that we will have to apply on the elements that we have in our sites. For example, this kind of responsive behaviors such as stretch, fix, scale proportionally, and so on. So let's jump to the editor and see what we've talked about. We covered the topic that the wrap behavior is perfect for paragraphs. Meanwhile, for short titles, we're going to use hug or maybe scale proportionally or fixed. We also talked about different behaviors that elements have. For example, you can see that images have stretch behavior, meanwhile text cannot have this one. And another thing that we've talked about is that you can also switch the sizing to an advanced sizing for all of your elements, and then you have the full control of the responsive behavior of the same elements. Next thing that we've covered is main layout tools that you can use to manage relationships between elements to create more precise layouts and avoid overlapping. We've talked about what's the difference between section grid and CSS grid. The section grid you can use only on sections, and CSS grid you can also apply on containers and manage relationships between some of the elements and not all the elements in your section. What special behaviors you can achieve with Flexbox. That repeaters and slideshows are perfect if you want to create some dynamic content in your site and you want to build one of the items just once, and the rest of the items will take the same layout from the first one. And how stack can help you manage gaps between elements and make it really easily. And the last thing is how to make your work more efficient. We've talked about pre-built sections that we have in the Wix Studio that you can take as a starting point, or maybe learn from them how to build your sites in the right way. We've talked about reusing sections and elements, that we have a couple of ways to do so. The first one is assets and libraries, and the second one is global sections. And the difference that in global sections, you are using basically the same section all over your pages in the same site, and you can apply your changes only once and you'll see the same change in all the pages. We also talked about content suggestions that we have for text. And also for images. And we also covered the smart tools that we have in Editor X, such as responsive AI for sections and AI image creation for images. And we also talked about all kind of shortcuts and add-ons and that kind of stuff. So, Annabelle, I think that we have covered it all, and we are ready to start with the questions.
Great. Thanks, Anastasia. So let's start with the first question. You mentioned that when making changes to the parenting on a mobile site, it changes the laptop. But when you change the color of an element on the mobile site, it doesn't change on the laptop. Can you just clarify if I understood that correctly? And if so, could you please explain?
Yes, that's right. So I want to expand my answer. And we have all kind of changes that we can do to elements in different breakpoints. So if I'm going to mobile breakpoint, I can change the positioning of the elements, styles of the elements, and parenting and all kind of stuff. So we can divide the kind of changes that are going to be applied all over the breakpoints and the changes that are relevant for our cascading rule, meaning that if I'm on the mobile breakpoint and I'm changing something, let's say color, it won't affect the higher breakpoints. Let's create a test. I'm changing it. Wait a minute. Let's change, let's say this one. We have this cell. I'm changing the color and I'm checking in the desktop and I see that it's still yellow. So the changes that are going to be applied only on the lower breakpoints and will not affect how your elements are looking in the higher breakpoints are changes that related to the styles, meaning colors, fonts, font sizes, and sizes, of course, as well, and also positioning, meaning that if I'm moving this element from the right corner to the left corner, and I'm checking the same element on the desktop, you will not see this change applied to the desktop. Now, changes that are going to be cross breakpoints are changes that are related to the content and to the hierarchy. Meaning, if I have this text and I'm going to change it here on mobile, let's write just test. And jump to the higher breakpoint, you can see that this change is applied all over the breakpoints, as well as the reparenting, the hierarchy changes. So if I'm opening the layers panel, you can see that the stack is a parent of these three elements. Now I'm going here to the mobile breakpoint, and I'm just dragging one of the elements outside of the stack. So first of all, you can see this notification, and I'm just checking the same element on the desktop, and you can see that it switched its positioning. So let's just move it a bit so we'll be able to see it. Here we go. So that's actually an answer. Changes that are related to the positioning, sizing, and styles are applied only on the lower breakpoints, and changes that are related to the content and hierarchy are applied to all the breakpoints.
Thanks, Anastasia. So the next question is, do we have full control over text in different platforms like mobile, tablet, and phone in terms of the line spacing and line breaks?
You certainly do. So let's do a quick test. You can see here it's spacing in 1.6, and here I can switch it to be, let's say, 1, and this change is not applied to the higher breakpoints. It's the same thing that we've talked about right now. It's a style, so I can change it in each breakpoint as the way that I want it to be. And if we're talking about the line breaking, it depends. So we've talked about the changes related to the content. So for example, if you're setting the line break, let's just add another section. So we'll see it in a better way. I'm going to copy this text to this section. Here we go. So let's say here in mobile, I'm going to set my line break with enter this way. So when I'm going to the desktop, you'll see that this change is still there because this kind of change is a content change. So I suggest you not to break lines this way and use another way to do so. You can think about the text element as two components inside of one. The first one is the text itself, and the second one is a bounding box of the text. So in case your text is scaling proportionally, what you can do, you can keep the same line break all over the breakpoints, or you can just switch the breakpoints, adjust the bounding box of the text, and still it will keep the same line break. I can adjust it this way, so I'll set a different line break from the desktop. But inside of the same breakpoint, the line break will be the same. Now, the thing that I was talking about, that you can treat the text as a text itself, and the bounding box, that you can define the responsive behavior for the box itself and for the text inside of it. Meaning, I'm switching my sizing option to advanced sizing. Now I can see that I can adjust the width of my bounding box of the text, but the text itself still scales proportionally. You can see this a pixel with a star, meaning it scales proportionally. So now I'm creating something different. I'm keeping the text scaling proportionally, and I'm adjusting the width of the bounding box in pixels, meaning the width of the bounding box is going to remain the same in this breakpoint. Right now I'm on tablet, so I'm changing the screen width. Meanwhile, I'm staying in the tablet breakpoint, so you can see that the line break is going to change because I set different behavior to the bounding box and to the text itself. So you can play around with it and find the ways it works for you.
Thanks, Anastasia. I'll move on to the next question. Can you test what happens when placing elements across borders of sections? It would be really great to know what happens when clients do stuff.
Sure. So let's test it. First of all, I think the main thing about the Wix Studio is that if you are not changing the default behavior of the elements and of the section of the page, everything is going to be okay, because we try to achieve the behavior of the element that it will be really hard for you to break it. So let's say this is the section and this is my element. So I can grab it, and if I'm placing it here or here, nothing is happening. The only thing that you have to consider is the reparenting. So in case I'm reparenting this element, it will go to another section all over the site. So another thing that could happen if you've changed something in the settings of the page itself. Let me show you. Right now, I've selected the page, and here I see overflow content. By default, it's always set to hide, but if you change it to show, and I'm just dragging this element to the right side, and now I can see that I've created this gap on the right side accidentally. So most of the time, you don't want it to happen. So you should just go to the page and set the overflow content to hide again, and it will fix the issue. And actually, we have something interesting in a Wix Studio. I can find it here in my dashboard of the same site. And here we have a way to hand over the site to a client with a content mode. So let's open it and I'll show it to you. And let's just try to refresh my page. Okay, so I have some internet issues, I think. So let's just explain it this way. The content mode for users is something that gives an opportunity to your clients to adjust only the content of the site, meaning your texts or images, and there will not be a situation when they can move elements or changing some settings in the inspector panel. Only thing that they are going to see is input fields in the inspector panel, and once they're clicking on one of the elements, they'll have an option to change content. That is the really great way to hand over your project to your clients.
Oh, thanks, Anastasia. So the next question is it possible to add our own designs to the sections panel and remove the pre-built designs that we don't use?
If we're talking about the sections and pre-built designs, I assume that we're talking about this tab in the Add panel. So you cannot add or remove sections from here because it is something that you got from us, from Wix. But if you want to do so, you have two ways to do it. Here in the assets, you have saved assets that you can save by clicking on 3 dots and save as asset. And the second way is to send the same assets to the libraries. You can choose from the library that you already have or to create a new library. So I really love to use libraries because usually we build sites in a concurrent mode, meaning that we have more than one person working on the same site. So we want to share the libraries we're using. And when you are using libraries, you have an option. Let me show you here. You have an option to share your library with another user. So you can just add them to the library or send them a link. And that is a way to save your sections that you have even added from the saved pre-built sections. From here, this one actually came from here, I think. Yes, this is the one. So once I'm adding it, I can also save it to my libraries and then reuse it in my sites and also share it with my coworkers.
Right.
Another thing that I wanted to say about the pre-built sections, that it works to check it once in a while, because sometimes we're going to add new designs and new pre-built sections and containers, so you don't want to miss it.
Okay, next up, it's a question from this Q&A. You showed a couple of fun extra tips at the end of the original webinar. Thank you for that. Is there any other cool stuff that we can do that we might not know about yet?
Cool stuff. I think that one of the coolest stuff that we have here is the interactions. We haven't covered in the past webinar, but we have a lot of cool stuff that you can create with it. So that is the interaction tab. And we have all kind of animations and interactions here. So entrance animations you're probably familiar with from the Wix or Editor X. Hover and click we had in Editor X. So it's pretty straightforward. You can click on something and something is happened to the same element or to another. And something new that we have here in Wix Studio is scroll and loop. So actually we have lots of pre-built designs for your animation that you can use just by clicking on one of them. It's like this flick. Doesn't look so good in my example, but you can choose something better. Let's say this one looks better. And just like this, you're applying your loop animation on one of your elements. We also have scroll animation that is the big features that we have in Wix Studio. And in scroll animations, you also can create your animations from scratch. You can also select from the pre-built options. You can also trigger your scroll animations by another elements. And something that we don't have in a classic Wix editor, but we have here, is a sticker effect. I don't have an example here, but I can show you really quick that we can create all kind of banners, let's say. So I'm going to change the color of one of the sections to this one, and let's just add a title to it. So now something new that we have here with the sticky behavior is that we can create a behavior that sticks to the bottom and then to the top, to the same element. So let's do it quickly. In the inspector panel, I can select my position type to be sticky. Then we have three options: top, bottom, or bottom and top. Now, top and bottom, that is something that we had in Editor X, but not in Classic Wix. You can also create a lot of cool stuff with it, but we also have bottom and top, that is something completely new. So I've set this banner to be a sticky bottom and top. Now I'm just arranging it. So in the layers panel, my banner will be above all the sections. I'm clicking on arrange and then bring to front. And I'm going to the preview mode. Let's wait for a couple of seconds. Okay, so it's working now. So you can see it at the top part of my page, this banner is stick to the bottom of my screen. And now I'm starting to scroll. And once it gets to its original position, it starts scrolling as a regular section. And now when it gets to the top of the page, it sticks to the top. So it is something new and fun and easy to create. And also, you can combine all kind of interactions and behaviors such as sticky. You can combine it with scroll animations, with loop animations, and you really can get very advanced layoutings and behaviors for your elements.
Those were super cool. I really like that effect. Thanks for showing, Anastasia. So one more question. When you say breakpoint, do you mean different types of devices?
Kind of, but I prefer to say that each breakpoint is a range of devices, because if I'm clicking on these three dots, you can see that we have a range of values. For example, desktop is a 1001 pixel and above, meaning that in this range, you can find tons of devices that are fitting this range. For example, a 1920 or a 1280, and we have so much more in between. So you probably don't want to design for each one of the devices that you can find in this world. So the better way to do it is to do it in breakpoints, meaning all the devices in this range will see this breakpoint, and all the devices in this range will see this kind of breakpoints. So the only thing that maybe you should understand that if you're in the desktop, like actual desktop in your browser, and you're resizing your screen width this way, let's say, what is going to happen? You're going to jump from one breakpoint to another, meaning that breakpoints are not related to the type of your device, but to the width of your browser or to your screen width. So you can get to the mobile breakpoint even being on the actual desktop, just by resizing your screen width, your browser width.
Thanks, Anastasia. I think that's all we have time for today. We're going to have to wrap up. So I just wanted to say a big thank you to all of you guys who joined us. It was great to have you here from all over the world. Don't worry, this session was recorded. So if you want to play it back and see any of your answers again, you can just play it back. You'll get a link in the email. If you have any questions that you felt were left unanswered, then you can go to the new Wix Studio forum. We've got all sorts of people there from UX and product managers, and they can actively answer your questions there. You can also join the Wix Studio Discord community if you haven't already. And of course, there's the Academy, which is a really great resource for you to get more information. But don't worry, you'll get a link to all of those resources I just mentioned to your email, so be sure to check them out. And please fill out our feedback form. There will be a link in the chat just about now. That will really help us with future webinars. And that's it, guys. Thank you so much again for joining. Have a great evening or day or morning, depending on where you are in the world. And it was really great having you here. Take care for now.